Sorry if this grosses you out. It's the sound of my red regular worms moving about my vermicomposter. They're dark pink and stretched out long and glistening wet. The stuff they're slithering over is old, rotting, moldy food scraps. But if I look in the next layer, they're still wriggling, but the stuff they are in is beautiful, dark, and nutrient rich. It's gardener's gold, worm castings. It's basically their poo.
All right, eat up, guys.
This is Gritty and Green. I'm your host, Meredith Nutting. On this episode, we're getting dirty and talking soil. I've got Tim Bennett from Bennett Composting to teach us how to eliminate food waste and turn it into food for your plants. I'll answer some of your garden questions, but first, soil. What is it? Where does it come from? And is it the key to happiness? Okay, let's get growing.
They were the soft, strong-soiled hands of a gardener. Bare of gloves, they delved eagerly into the earth.
That's radio host Paul Harvey in his series, The Rest of the Story. He's the person that said, man, despite his artistic pretensions, his sophistication, and his many accomplishments, owes his existence to a 6-inch layer of topsoil and the fact that it rains. And it's true. Soil is amazing. It's alive, teeming with over half of the Earth's species. There are more microorganisms in 1 teaspoon of soil than there are people on the planet. And its creation is slow. It takes up to 1,000 years to create a layer of topsoil 1 inch deep.
And now, you know the rest of the story.
Well, not quite. We've just got started. Have you ever considered where soil began and what it's made of? Let me take you on a journey. Okay, it's about 9.3 billion years after the Big Bang. Dust and rocks have been swirling around space, collecting in bigger and bigger pieces. As the clumps get bigger, the gravitational force increases, pulling in more and more dust. Eventually, we ended up with the planets. And when Earth was just a little baby, the molten rock and metals it is made of started to condense and cool. The surface solidified, forming the layer that we live on, the crust. On average, it's about 20 miles deep, making up only 1% of the Earth's volume. But man, does it have a lot going on. At least it does now, but back then the crust was just made of bedrock. Bedrock is basically the base layer, and it's different depending on where you are. In places with volcanoes, the bedrock is made with basalt and granite. In other places, it's limestone, and still in others, sandstone. Whatever that bedrock is, that is the parent material of the soil that will come. It is the material that erodes from the forces of wind and water. Eventually, those rocks turn back into the dust and sand they started at billions of years ago. Except this time, they're not swirling in space, they're on planet Earth. So that's the first factor of soil composition, the broken down bedrock. The second component is climate. The climate dictates how fast that erosion will happen, but it also influences what kind of organic matter will break down. Of course, between a barren, dusty planet and the lush green one we have currently, there was the evolution of life on Earth. But we'll just fast forward through that for now. There's life on Earth, it lives, it dies, and when it dies, all the molecules in the tissues break down to form organic matter. In places with a warm, wet climate, decomposition happens faster than in cold, dry places. These areas with a lot of life, like the Amazon rainforest, have more material to break down than places like the Sahara. These two factors, bedrock composition and climate, have created over 7,000 different types of soil around the world, all very particular to the places they exist. The soil in Pennsylvania is a varied mix with the most fertile, well-draining soils in the southeast and the older, more weathered soil in the middle and western part of the state. Perhaps the most important type of soil in Pennsylvania is the Hazelton series. Yes, these soils all have names too. These Hazelton soils cover 1.5 million acres across Pennsylvania and go south down into Maryland, West Virginia, and Kentucky. They are so important, in fact, that there's even a state bill, House Bill 771, to officially make the Hazelton series the state soil of Pennsylvania. In the Philadelphia area, bedrock is composed of schist, which eroded to create soils rich in minerals and nutrients. The Schuylkill and Delaware rivers carried a loose silt and gravel mix called alluvium. But you can really only see this kind of soil in places like Fairmount Park or historic cemeteries. Most of the soil in our Philadelphia backyards has been trashed by years of construction and building. So it's up to us to create soil that our plants are going to grow in. And to do that, we need both the sand and the organic matter, also known as compost. And who better to talk about compost than someone who spends his life making it?
I'm Tim Bennett. I am the founder of Bennett Compost. We are a curbside collection composting company, so we pick up food scraps from people's homes and apartments throughout Philadelphia, and we make those food scraps into compost and other soil products.
By my count, there are now 3 food scrap pickup services in Philadelphia: Bennett, Circle Compost, and The Rounds. But back in the aughts, there was one option to have food scraps picked up, and that was with your trash.
We got started back in 2009 because I was living in South Philly at the time in a second floor apartment, and I wanted to compost, and I didn't feel like I had a good way to do it. So I looked around and thought, is there a place I can take it to? And there wasn't a place I could take it to. I thought, is there someone who would pick it up? And there wasn't anyone who would pick it up, and I didn't have outdoor space to do it. And knowing what I know now, 15 years later, I probably should have just tried worm composting, and that would have worked or wouldn't have, and I might have moved on to something else. But I didn't, and I didn't realize that was a thing at the time.
Coincidentally, that's actually why I started my worm bin. I had a small South Philly apartment, and I was doing a weird commute that made me miss trash day almost every week. The worm bin was my solution to avoid my trash can sitting around with stinky food scraps. The worms ate them up for me.
I was just like, well, maybe there's something here. Maybe there's an opportunity. Maybe there are other people like me who want to compost but live in the city and don't have a way to do it. And I was kind of at a place in my life where I was kind of trying to figure out what was the next thing I was going to do. And so I took $100 and put it in a bank account, and that was kind of the genesis of it. I figured everything else out from there.
Only a few cities in the United States have a composting program. Probably not surprisingly, San Francisco was one of the first. Residents are mandated to put out their compostables in a green bin separate from their trash and recycling. Philly did have a kind of system for about 60 years. From the 1930s to the 1990s, farmers from Jersey would cross the river twice a week and pick up food scraps to feed their pigs. 17 farmers picked up over 30,000 pounds of food scraps a year, and they were paid $1.9 million to do it. It would have cost the city double to have that thrown in the landfills, though. Of course, that program had ended by the time Tim invested his $100 in his new venture.
Maybe after the first month of getting started, we were picking up from 3 or 4 households, so it was maybe 40 pounds a week, right? And now we're picking up probably around 4 million pounds a year. So it's been quite the trajectory. We pick up from over 6,000 households now and 125 businesses all here in Philadelphia. And it's been kind of a wild ride. I mean, it was just me when we started, and now there are close to 30 people who work here.
In June 2023, with support from the EPA, Bennett and the city's Park and Recreations Department entered a partnership. Bennett Compost got a long-term lease at a vacant Parks and Rec facility in the Crescentville neighborhood. In return, Bennett collects food scraps from the rec centers and returns compost to their gardens free of charge.
And this is where all the material that we collect comes here as its first stop. That's where we make all the compost that we make, and all of our soil stuff comes out of it. It's kind of our central kind of hub.
Okay, so we've been talking about it for a while, but what is compost?
Compost itself is a soil amendment. And so what that technically means is it's something that you add to soil to replenish nutrients, to add microbes and microbial life to existing soil. In some ways it's very similar to what a fertilizer would do, but it also has kind of just a web of kind of soil life and microbial life that is part of it. So it's also kind of helping to encourage that growth in the soil and replenishing that stuff.
Turning food into fertilizer isn't a quick process. Take an apple core, for example.
So the apple core starts its life as an apple. You take a bite of it, you eat it, you put it in your Bennett compost bucket. We come by and we empty that bucket into one of our collection vehicles, whether it's one of our bicycles or one of our trucks, depending on where you are in Philadelphia. That vehicle brings it up here, along with all the other food scraps, and the food scraps are then blended with the wood chips that we have on site, and they are all built into these big piles that are probably about 8 feet tall, 20 feet long, 10 feet wide, and have a pipe kind of running down the middle of the bottom of the pile.
That huge mound is then covered with finished compost from the pile that came before.
That acts as a biofilter, so that helps to kind of keep smells down and keep animals away.
And that pipe running along the bottom of the pile, it gets pumped full of air that infiltrates the mixture of food scraps and wood chips.
And that air is helping to feed all the natural decomposers and microbes that are all around us and that help to break down all that kind of material. So essentially what we're doing is we're creating the right habitat by having the right blend of different materials and oxygen. It creates a home for all this microbial activity that actually helps to do all the decomposing. The piles get very hot, so they usually get between 150 and 160 degrees. And so that is hot enough that it kills all the harmful pathogens that might be in the rotting food. But as long as you keep it under 170, you're not going to kill some of the beneficial bacteria and microbes that are helping to break down the material.
That pile sits around for about 4 weeks with microbes eating all those food scraps, including that apple core that we started with. As the food breaks down, the water that it held is released and the pile gets smaller and smaller.
By the time it's gotten through the first 4 weeks, most of the food waste is completely unrecognizable.
Different piles are combined to make a huge mound, 120 feet long, where it sits for another month.
It moves to a final set for 2 weeks, that's 10 weeks, and then we take that material and we run it through a screening process.
The screening process is where the big pieces that haven't quite broken down are sifted out. And that is what goes on top of the new pile to stop the smells from getting out and the critters from getting in.
So at that point, the material looks, for the most part, how it will look when it's a final product, but it's still not done yet.
All the small broken down material gets put in, you guessed it, another pile. This time without air, where it sits for about 6 to 8 weeks.
That's our curing pile. And so that the temperatures are going to get down a little bit more. You're going to have temperatures that are going to kind of be more in the 110 to 115 range, and then kind of go down from there. And that just allows for different kind of microorganisms and bacteria to thrive and help kind of finish off the composting process. So it is a stable kind of product that you can use to help your plants and your vegetables kind of grow.
Want to get a bit nerdy with me? When the compost pile starts, the bacteria breaking down the food are referred to mesophilic. They like temperatures between 68 and 113 degrees Fahrenheit. They break down the simple organic compounds. And as they do it, the temperature in the pile starts to rise. Then the thermophilic bacteria take over. Those are the heat lovers. They break down more complex compounds like proteins and fats. They also kill weed seeds and pathogens. Then, as the temperature drops, the mesophiles return along with fungus and break down anything that's left. So working with a compost pile isn't just turning dirt. It requires caring for 1 billion microscopic creatures.
We call it living soil, right? Like, I mean, it's not a lot of soil that you might buy in if you're buying a bag at a store, there's no way for oxygen to get into it. You're going to get a different product than you are when it's a living it's living, breathing material. But there's lots of microscopic and organic life that's all kind of very beneficial for plant growth.
Soil microbes are vital to growing plants. They cycle nutrients, break down organic material, control pests and pathogens, degrade pollutants, among a host of other benefits. And for people, these microbes are responsible for our immune systems from the time we were grubby little children digging in the dirt. They create antibiotics and probiotics that help keep us healthy, and they can trigger a release of serotonin, which is the chemical in our brain that makes us feel happy. So these bacteria present in composting are vital to the health of living things, but the act of composting is also important for the health of our planet.
So when food goes to a landfill, it often breaks down without any oxygen, and so it breaking down anaerobically. When that happens, it releases methane as an off-product of that. Landfills are actually the third leading cause of methane emissions in the United States. The first is natural gas extraction, right? And methane is liquid natural gas, right? So like that makes a lot of sense that would have it. And the second is agriculture, mostly from dairy cows. There's a lot of things that are coming out the backsides of dairy cows that are emitting methane because there are so many dairy cows. That is the second leading. But after that, landfills are. So it's a major contributor of methane emissions, which is a greenhouse gas. And when you compost, the methane's not emitted because you're doing it with oxygen.
To combat climate change, in 2015, the USDA and the EPA announced a goal to cut food waste in half by 2030. So far, though, the amount of food waste going into landfills has only increased.
We're still only, despite the growth we've had and success, we're only picking up a tiny fraction of it, right? We're picking up from less than 2% of the households throughout the city. So all the work we're doing, you multiply that times 50, times 60, right? Like that's how much food waste there is just from households in Philadelphia.
Philadelphia throws out 206 million pounds of food, like actual food that could have been eaten, not just banana peels and eggshells. In fact, nearly 17% of Philadelphia's trash is wasted food. So reducing food waste is important, especially when 600,000 Philadelphians experience food insecurity. Still, food scraps do make up some of the food waste that makes its way into landfills, and they need to be diverted too. If it's this important, why is it so hard for cities like Philadelphia to create a curbside pickup composting program along with trash and recycling?
Even if the city said, we want to start composting tomorrow, we have the money, we have the workforce, we have the vehicles, and everyone tomorrow can put out a bucket of food scraps and yard waste and we're going to collect it all. There is not the infrastructure in the Philadelphia region to handle it. There needs to be an additional infrastructure. And it's really hard to ship food waste long distances because it is the heaviest part of this trash. I mean, it is mostly water, and water is heavy, right? And so shipping it doesn't kind of really make sense. But outside of that, there's also just kind of the economic realities of how does the city pay for that. Philadelphia is a big city and it's got lots of challenges, and so it has to figure out kind of what its priorities are, right? And but those are going to be always the two challenges: how are you paying for collection, and then where are you taking kind of the material?
Just to give you an idea, New York launched a pilot composting program in 2013, and by 2017, it was reaching 3.3 million people and costing up to $20 million annually. But you have to remember that food scraps cost money to put in landfills too. It's estimated that if the U.S. can increase its compost by 8%, it would save $16 billion in waste management costs. But of course, funding isn't the only problem that cities have when starting a compost program.
The other thing that we have going for us that sometimes bigger municipal programs run into is that because the people who are using our program are choosing to use the program, that it's first of all, it's an opt-in, like no one is being mandated to do it. And secondly, they're not just opting in, they're paying money to opt in. So they're very committed to making sure that the right stuff stays in and the stuff that's not supposed to be composted doesn't. And some municipal programs, especially ones that have been mandated, have run into problems of high levels of contamination.
Contamination can be something that we can see, like broken glass or big plastic. Those things are annoying but can be sifted out. But contamination can also be in the form of toxic chemicals that don't break down and are invisible. Removing those from your compost pile can be a lot harder. And it's not always intentional. Some of it can be lack of education. And it's also hard when there's a tendency for companies to greenwash products, hinting that they are more ecologically friendly than they are.
Compostable means it will actually become compost. Biodegradable generally just means that it will degrade into very tiny pieces. Think of microplastics.
Oh, microplastics. It seems like every month there's a new organ in which researchers are discovering microplastics in our body. They've been found in our blood, lungs, intestines, crossing the placental barrier in pregnant women, in breast milk, and in every testicle tested in one study. They are everywhere. And we just don't know yet what they are doing to our bodies, but it's not looking good. And they can pass from the soil into the plants we grow and eat and into our bodies. They don't actually go away.
Something's biodegradable, it's not actually going to compost in our piles or other people's piles, so we can't accept it for composting. It does not mean that, in a giant industrial facility with a grinder or in a lab setting it didn't break down. I'm sure it did if it meets the compostable certifications. But again, if the facility where your material is going to is not able to handle it, it might as well be trash.
So it's been a challenge to create citywide composting programs, and that's the void that commercial curbside food waste pickups provide.
When I started the business 15 years ago, I used to tell people I was in the typewriter business because I was like, within 10 years, the city will probably figure this out and will be obsolete in the way that people don't use typewriters anymore. They use computers. And here we are 15 years later, and their city is still not doing composting. But I think more than ever, I'm a believer now that there's not just going to be one model that's going to work for everybody.
But Philadelphia is working on it through a partnership with Bennett.
We do some work with the city through the Parks and Rec department. We do a program where we're collecting food scraps from rec centers.
The city's rec centers serve over 2 million meals to children and the elderly through different city-run programming. Those meals produce over 150 tons of waste a year. But starting in 2001, Bennett has been collecting that food waste and turning it into compost that is then returned to the city for use in the urban gardens and farms in their Farm Philly network. Please note that an earlier version of this podcast included information about the Community Compost Network. That is a separate but also exciting city compost project that Bennett supports through some training and education. Of course, along with composting companies and the city programs, there is a third option.
So there are options for people to compost on their own, depending on how much outside space and how close you want to be and how much material you want to try to compost. There are various systems, either kind of multi-bin systems or tumblers. If you don't have a lot of outside space, really the best option is vermicomposting, which is composting with worms.
There are challenges to doing this at home with limited space, and they can be creepy, like critter creepy, like rat critters.
The two things that we do, that we found that keep kind of rodents away from our piles is, one, our piles get really hot, and so it's not comfortable for an animal to be in 150 degrees, the same way it's not comfortable for you to stick your hand in something that's 150 degrees. We also move the piles a lot, right? Like, so we're moving them. Piles are not sitting for months and months and months, and sometimes that's what can be tricky in the city. If you're trying to do it in your own backyard, it may not be getting moved around a lot, and so then it may be kind of like warm, nice, dark place for an animal to be in.
Even in a system that keeps the rats out, finding the right mix of materials to create that wonderful ecosystem of microbes found in Bennett's piles is pretty tricky.
Generally, kind of the standard rule of thumb is that you want kind of 2 parts what we call browns, so that's like your leaves, wood chips. Some people use shredded newspaper. They don't have access to that. People use straw, depending on sawdust, depending on kind of what they have access to. 2 parts of that to the 1 part food waste. All these materials have a certain amount of carbon to a certain amount of nitrogen, and so you're looking for kind of an ideal place. And kind of the ideal place to start is kind of a 30-to-1 ratio of carbon and nitrogen. But that can be challenging when you're living in a Philly row home and you're like, where am I supposed to get all these leaves or all of this, all this carbon material? And that is one of the challenges of kind of matching these 2 materials that you have. If you have too much greens and not enough browns, it's going to be runny, it might be a little smelly, it doesn't kind of work right. And if you have not enough of that, then nothing happens to it. So it is kind of tricky to balance those things.
All of this is not to discourage you from composting at home. As you heard at the start of this episode, I have had a worm bin for over a decade. I also have a compost tumbler. But just like anything living, it takes time to learn how to get it right.
One of my favorite things is when someone sends us a note and they're like, I need to cancel my service. And then you're like, oh no, why at first? And they're like, because I'm going to be composting. I want to try composting on my own now. And so that's kind of like a rewarding thing to hear. So, we kind of encourage that.
And if you don't want to, there's always Bennett.
Our goal has always been to make composting easy for people in Philadelphia. And if we help to kind of move that along, or we're a part of that, then, we feel like we have done good work. I think that community groups have a part to play with it. I think that urban agriculture has a part to play with it. I think that small businesses like ourselves have a part. They all have a part in that.
That was Tim Bennett from Bennett Composting. You can find out more about their work at bennettcompost.com. And I'll put more information about the city's composting partnership in the show notes. In a podcast about urban gardening, talking about soil, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the risks of gardening in the city. Urban soil can have a lot of contamination from past industry, vehicles, lead-based paints, and improper waste removal. Heavy metals like lead, cadmium, arsenic, and mercury can hang around in the soil for decades. Lead is probably the most common because until the 1970s, it was in everything. Even if you aren't gardening, the heavy metals in the soil can be an issue because they stick to the dust and get kicked up in the air, and we breathe in or ingest the particles. And of course, they can cause a slew of health issues. Cadmium and arsenic are carcinogenic and can cause kidney damage and other chronic conditions. Mercury can result in neurological and developmental differences. Lead is the most concerning as it affects children to a great degree, damaging their nervous systems, leading to cognitive and behavioral differences and learning challenges. In Philly, at least, young kids have regular lead screenings. Becoming exposed to lead can be as easy as living next door to a construction site. So you can imagine that if breathing in dust could be harmful, kneeling down with your face a foot from the urban soil you're digging in could be toxic. So, should we give up gardening? Absolutely not. But everyone should have their soil tested for heavy metals, especially if they'll be playing or digging or gardening. To do that, you go to the Penn Extension website, I'll put it in the show notes, and you fill out the soil testing form and then get your samples. The website has a detailed explainer, but basically you take a scoop of soil from about 10 different spots around your yard, dry them out, put them in a plastic bag, and send them in the mail. In a week or so, your results will come in. If the results indicate high levels of heavy metal, you may want to look into removing the soil or covering it to avoid lead exposure. There are some plants that are used as bioremediators. Sunflowers are a popular one being studied. These plants can remove lead from the soil and store it in their tissues, so then you can dispose of it. But the effectiveness of this process is still being studied. Regardless of the heavy metals in your soil, though, you probably don't want to be planting in it, mainly because it's not great for plant growth. A lot of it is compact and clay and not really alive. What you really want is a ratio of about 1/3 soil, 1/3 compost, and 1/3 sand. And you really want all of those great microbes Tim Bennett was talking about. You could test your soil for nutrients, similar to testing for heavy metals, but a different form to fill out. Or you could just do raised beds. In small spaces, raised beds allows your garden to be easily delineated into plant space and human or dog space. I'm a big fan. You can buy a raised bed soil mix or make your own. One little tip, the city of Philadelphia offers free compost, mulch, and manure to residents. It's at the Fairmont Recycling Center, and it's a really great way to fill beds without killing your budget. So that's the dirt on dirt. Now, let's answer some of your garden questions.
Hi, so my question is about municipal dirt. I know that some cities and towns, they do like a leaf collection and lawn clipping stuff, and then they turn it into compost. I've been warned against using it by some people because they say that if folks put chemicals on their lawns, then that's going to end up in the lawn clippings and then make whatever the recycling product is, the compost, it'll have those chemicals in them. So do you know anything about how that kind of material is processed and how you would be able to tell if your material from your city does have that kind of chemical in it? Thanks so much.
Great question, especially in this episode. In a commercial compost setup, one that reaches high temperatures like we heard Tim Bennett talk about, some chemicals do break down. However, there are a few persistent herbicides that don't, mainly clopyralid and aminopyralid. These herbicides target broadleaf plants like thistle and nightshades and are very persistent in the environment. Even small amounts can damage sensitive crops like tomatoes, beans, and sunflowers. You may see twisted, stunted growth and deformed leaves on plants that have been exposed. So, should you use the municipal compost? That kind of depends on your goals and your risk tolerance. In Philadelphia, the municipal compost offered to the public is made from leaves, grass clippings, and vegetarian animal manure collected broadly from across the city. Pre-COVID, the compost was regularly tested through the Seal of Testing Assurance Program, STA, which tested for nutrient content, pH, moisture content, and the presence of contaminants such as heavy metals and pathogens. At the time, the city's compost met the requirements for the STA certified compost label. Nothing has changed in the way that the city makes the compost, but it doesn't currently hold the STA certificate. COVID-related staffing turnovers led to it lapsing, though the city hopes to start testing regularly and regain that status in the future. However, the standard test for the STA certification does not test for these persistent herbicides. So if the city does reinstate its certification, it would need to opt into that testing too. So, long answer short, if you're keen on everything in your garden being 100% absolutely positively chemical free, you may not want to risk it. And if you're planting the very last of your grandmother's heirloom seeds, there's no more in existence, you may not want to risk it. Personally, I know plenty of gardeners who haven't had an issue with the city's compost, and I will certainly continue to use this free resource. I hope this helps you choose what's best for you and your garden. Thanks so much for sending in your question. If you have any garden-related questions, email me at grittyandgreen@coolgoonproductions.com. Thanks so much for joining me on this episode of Gritty and Green, and a special thanks to Tim Bennett from Bennett Composting. If you want to learn more about their work, please go to bennettcompost.com. And if you're enjoying this podcast, I'd love it if you'd like, subscribe, rate, and share it so that others can also enjoy it. Gritty and Green is presented by Green Philly in collaboration with Cool Goon Productions. It was written, directed, and edited by me, Meredith Nutting. Theme music by Kazuya. If you would like more information about local sustainability, go to greenphl.com.